So I just realized that it has officially been a year since I've been on booktube because my first video last year was my May wrap-up. That's a weird thought process. Hey guys, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my May wrap-up. So as usual, you guys know the drill. Let's do a rundown of my stats for the month. First, I read 8 books, and across those I read about 3,369 pages. My average rating was about 4 stars, so a pretty good reading month overall. Unfortunately, I did have 2 DNFs, but my genre breakdown was 2 romances, 5 fantasy, and 1 nonfiction. This month I thought it would be fun to go from my highest rated book to my lowest rated. So first off, We Freed the Stars by Hafsah Faizal. This is the second book in the Sands of Arawiya duology, and oh my lord, I adored it. This duology is set in a world that is based on ancient Arabia. There once was magic, but about 90 years ago something happened and it disappeared. However, we are following 2 different perspectives, 𝗖cie and 𝗖ție. Both of them are working to try and find this magical artifact that will bring magic back to their world, but they are encountering many different obstacles along the way, including each other. 𝗖cie is actually the prince as well as a well-known assassin who is known as the Prince of Death, while 𝗖ție is actually a hunter and has to disguise her gender because in the area she lives, women are considered second-class citizens, and if anyone ever found out she was a woman, she would likely be punished, even though she is the only one who can traverse this magical forest that surrounds the entire country. This book picks up where the first one left off, and we are following 𝗖cie, 𝗖ție, and 𝗖cie's friend 𝗖ție again, and I adored it. This one actually also has 𝗖ციė's perspective, and he is so fun. I loved watching him throughout the story. While he starts as like comic relief in the first book, he becomes such a bigger and more well-developed character. That's something throughout this entire series that I thought was amazing, was Hafsah Faizal's creation of all of these characters in her world. They are all so distinct and interesting and fun. They have tragic backstories and amazing relationships, which makes you care so much more for the side characters as well, and I think that's really impressive. Once again, the writing in this is just intoxicating. It's so lush and beautiful. Hafsah Faizal just creates such an amazing world in this story, and I loved that we got to explore more of it in this one, whereas in the first book we were really only focusing on a few specific areas of the country. This just has such a well-developed setting, it has immersive world, and it has well-placed humor. The story flows beautifully. So many of these tabs are absolutely gorgeous lines that I want to write in my journal and tell everyone about, along with just fantastic moments that I can't wait to revisit because this story is so amazing. Some of the specific side characters that I really loved is Lana, 𝗖cie's little sister. We get to see a lot more of her in this book, and she is so sassy and really just feels like a 14-year-old girl. She was hilarious to watch, and I loved how she was not afraid to call people out on their crap. On top of that, Kifa, who was introduced about halfway through the first book, is a lot more prominent in this one, and I adore her as well. She is also asexual, so we got some awesome representation there. She's just a total badass warrior who cares about her team so deeply, is willing to do whatever it takes to ensure their safety and their success. Although the story is on the slower side, and what with it being so chunky, it does take some time to develop. Even with that, there's still constantly something happening throughout the book, so you're never bored. Plus, whenever we do hit a action scene, it is fast-paced, it is running hard, and oh my gosh, so many of the chapters in the action sequences would always leave on cliffhangers and have my heart pounding because I needed to know what was happening next. The ending of this book was so amazing. I'm gonna revisit it because it was beautiful. I loved it. She gave me things I didn't even know I wanted as soon as I read it. That's perfect. That's exactly what I needed. That this fits so well with the entirety of the story. I'm gonna be recommending this book to everyone now. I've officially declared it as my favorite fantasy. I will officially buy anything that Hafsah Faizal comes out with. Okay? Okay. Next up is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This was a reread for me. I loved this a second time around. I also gave this one 5 stars. This is a enemies to friends to lovers romance story between the first son of the president as well as the Prince of Wales, and it is so adorable and romantic. I actually went through and tabbed this up a little bit. Unsurprisingly, I'm just eating this up as the story goes on. I love Alex and Henry so much. They feel like such real people that you can connect with. So there's tons of tension even before we've really started to kick into the lovers aspect. That could be because we do start in enemies territory, but the transition into their friendship is just so pure and sweet and adorable, and I love it. I love the things that they bond over, and even once they are in this like weird sort of friends area, they still are kind of mean to each other and just have fantastic banter and interesting conversations. Okay, did that review make any sense? No? Okay, cool. Sorry. After that one, I also read Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. This is a dual memoir of the two ladies who created the famous podcast, My Favorite Murder. I really enjoyed this the second time around. This was a 5-star the first time I read it, and the second time around, I do think it's more of like a 4.5 for me. There are certain sections that do kind of drag a bit, or just feels as though what is there is sort of filler content, but all in all, I really loved this. I appreciate that these ladies were willing to share traumatic stories from their past and impart upon the readers some knowledge that they have learned throughout their lives. Plus, it's really impressive how they managed to take all of these stories and tie them into the fantastic one-liners that have come about because of the podcast. I also just love that throughout this book, it's so clear the voice of whether it is Karen or Georgia. You can really tell which is which because they are so distinctly and unapologetically themselves. I went through and tabbed up a bunch of lines this time around. I was really into tabbing this month. I don't know why. So many of these are just little bits of wisdom here and there or funny lines that I can connect with. I think it's just amazing how these ladies have laid it all out to bear in this book. Like I said, 4.5 stars, not quite 5 stars again, but I still really enjoyed it. I'm glad I reread it. After that one, however, next is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and this was the pick for the Sugar and Spice book club this month. I really enjoyed this one as well. I loved Emily Henry's first book, well, excuse me, her first romance book, Beach Read, and so I was very excited to try out some more of her writing. The story is following Poppy. She used to be best friends with Alex, and they would go on vacation every summer until 2 summers ago something happened and they haven't spoken since. Poppy then ends up getting in kind of a emotional rut, and her friend suggests maybe she try and go back to the last time she was happy, which Poppy realizes was when she was on vacation with Alex. She then invites him to go on vacation again and see if maybe they can rekindle their friendship or possibly something more. And this was really fun. I love that she managed to take Poppy, who feels like a manic pixie dream girl, but actually make her realistic and have real flaws that she acknowledges and discusses, and is even discussed in how it can affect their relationship. And apparently that's just like a hot button for me because I love it when that happens. I just adore Emily Henry's writing. I think it's so fun how she manages to create such lively and entertaining characters who feel like people you want to be friends with. And then because they are constantly going on vacation, this is told in a style in which we alternate back and forth between the past vacations the two went on and then the current vacation they are on. So we get to see how their friendship developed over the years and then how it has changed in the future. With that, we see many different settings, and I think it's also really impressive how Emily Henry made each of them come to life so well. It feels as though we were on vacation with the pair because each of these unique places were always so immersive and alive inside the story. Kind of same with Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered. I do think this meandered a little bit at certain points and kind of had little lulls here and there, but all in all, I really enjoyed the story. I loved watching the development of their friendship and later relationship. Dramatic ending scene that happened was just fantastic. All in all, I would say this was a perfect read to take on vacation with you. Personally, I do think I still love Beach Read more, but I did really enjoy this. I went with 4 stars on it. Officially read anything that Emily Henry writes in the romance genre. Okay, after that is Red Queen by Christina Henry, and this was that right? Christina Henry? I have an Emily Henry and a Christina Henry in 1 month. It's confusing. It is Christina Henry. Red Queen is the second book in the Chronicles of Alice series, and this is a reimagining of Alice in Wonderland. This one is more so Through the Looking Glass book in the Alice in Wonderland universe. I really enjoyed this one as well. In the first book, I had a bit of a complaint that magic and the world wasn't as well explored as I had hoped it would have been, but in this one, she did remedy that. We got to see more of the world outside of just the city where Alice and Hatcher originally lived, and with that, we also got to see more magic that wasn't just focused around the bad magician slash mob bosses in the first book. In this one, we get to see how Christina Henry has reimagined the Red Queen and the White Queen, and I actually very much enjoyed what she did here. She manages to take these characters that are so nostalgic for me and turn them into horrifying, scary, nightmarish people. It's really impressive. However, with all of that, the plot in this one was a lot slower. It didn't have nearly the amount of action as the first book. It was also far less gory and horrific, but at the same time, I think this had more more character development for Alice specifically, because in the first book, majority of the book, she is alongside Hatcher, her companion, whereas in this one, she is by herself for a lot of the time. I really loved how we got to see Alice's questioning of who she really is and who will she become. With all of that being said, however, I did miss Hatcher, specifically the dialogue we see between Hatcher and Alice, because he is sort of her conscience and calms him down, while at the same time he sort of works as like her anger and ramps Alice up, and I love seeing the dynamic between them, but we didn't really get a lot of that in this one. I do think this was a well way to round out and end the story. I think it was a satisfying conclusion, but again, just a bit slower than the first one. I ended up going with 3.5 stars on this one. As much as I enjoyed the additions to the world, I do kind of wish that more character and plot had been focused on in this story also. Next up is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas, and this was my personal book club read. I was really looking forward to this one because I loved Aiden Thomas's first book, Cemetery Boys, but unfortunately this did kind of let me down. I think false expectations did kind of play a part in that. First off, this is a Peter Pan retelling set in present day, in which we were following Wendy when she was, I think, 12, 13, she and her brothers disappeared and they were gone for like 6 months, but eventually came back, and now Wendy is 18, but her brothers have never returned. Recently in her town, kids have gone missing again, and eventually she ends up running into Peter Pan and they have to work together to figure out what is happening to these children. I think because Cemetery Boys sort of read on the older side of YA, I expected this to follow suit, but it doesn't. Personally, I think it reads more on the younger side / older side of middle grade, which was odd given the fact that Wendy is 18. However, with that, I don't think she really reads like an 18-year-old. She's pretty immature, and on top of that, Peter, his entire character, is also incredibly immature, which makes sense. He is the boy who doesn't grow up, but it just made the entire feel of the novel on the younger side. I did enjoy the writing in this. It's very digestible, it reads fast, and you can just blast through it very quickly, but with that, it was a slow-moving mystery. That being said, I absolutely loved the idea of turning a Peter Pan retelling into a mystery. I thought that was very cool, and again, I just wish it had been focused on more in the story so it would have flowed even quicker and I would have like blasted through this book in no time. On top of that, what with the reading younger, I really expected this to take a very dark turn when we hit the climax, and while it did get dark, it wasn't as dark as I would have wanted it to go, but again, that's just due to a misalignment between expectations and reality. Two things I did really like in this was, one, how grief was handled, specifically with Wendy and her parents. They have been grieving the loss of first all of their children and then later their two younger boys, and it's really just interesting to see how each of them handles it in such different ways but are so realistic, and you can really understand how much pain they're in based on their reactions, which then leads to the reason they act in certain ways within this story. On top of that, probably because of Wendy's grief, she also has serious anxiety. It is seen she constantly is overwashing her hands, and I thought that was a very interesting way to showcase her anxiety. It's not something I'd ever read before, but again, just connected in with how Wendy was processing her grief for her two younger brothers, as well as the survivor guilt we see from her. With all of that being said, one of my biggest drawbacks in the story was the romantic element. I really did not enjoy it. Left a sour taste in my mouth. I'm not gonna say anything more. I talked about this in my part 1 Star Wars reading vlog. If you want to hear more about it, go over there and watch it. Again, I just think it was a misalignment between what I expected and what the book actually was, so I went with 3 stars on this. I would recommend it still. Just be aware of what you're going into and maybe you'll like it more than I did. Okay, and then finally, unfortunately, the lowest book of the month was Fire with Fire by Destiny Soria. I received an arc of this from NetGalley. I requested it because it sounded very similar to How to Train Your Dragon, and I was really looking forward to it. We are following 2 sisters who end up being on opposing sides of this ongoing war between humans, dragons, and sorcerers. I love a good sibling story, and in this we are following the 2 separate sisters' perspectives. Dani, the younger sister, she has been trained in dragon hunting, but she isn't very dedicated to it. She wants to live a normal teenage life, whereas on the opposite side, Eden, the older sister, is incredibly dedicated to slaying, but she has a serious anxiety and hates the fact that she feels as though her parents never really give her the opportunity to show herself as a true slayer. Along with that, Dani, although she isn't very dedicated to dragon slaying, seems to just glide right through through, and that aggravates Aiden to no end. So it's very interesting the dynamic that develops because of that, where the one thing that should be keeping these sisters together is actually what's drawing them apart. However, unfortunately, I think the dual perspectives that was used in this book ended up kind of being a hindrance, because I had a very hard time connecting with Aiden, which meant I favored Danny's chapters a great deal and ended up skimming most of Aiden's. I commented something in my reading vlog that I realized actually made a lot of sense, which was in Danny's perspective, there is a good deal more dialogue than Aiden's. And I think that was actually purposely done because it showcases how Danny has created a circle of friends around her. She has more connections, whereas Aiden is definitely more of a loner. And with something that happens in the story, I think that makes sense that Aiden fell prey to it because she was such a loner. Trying to keep spoiler free. While Aiden's anxiety did give her a bit of depth, overall, I just felt she was written in a way where she seemed very narcissistic and almost heartless. While on the opposite side, Danny, yeah, she could be kind of annoying. She was a teenager, but she was very unapologetically herself, and I really loved that about her, and she was just more fun to follow. Some of the other characters throughout the story were interesting as well. I really loved Nox the dragon. He was very sarcastic and just very funny. I loved seeing the commentary he would have throughout the story. There was a bit of drama that revolved around Danny and her ex-childhood best friend Sadie, which led into some discussions of sexuality. Danny was bisexual, and I wish that had actually been utilized more. I think it would have been more interesting and added more depth to Danny's character as well as Sadie, but it kind of just got brushed to the side, unfortunately. There was also a immortal being, I guess you could call him, who was magical and yada yada yada. He ended up being a romantic interest, and like, I was interested in the character as a character, but as a romantic interest, I really didn't like it. It felt creepy, was very insta-lovey. When I initially went into this book, I actually thought it was going to be more of a fantastical world, but it is actually very urban fantasy. It really caught me off guard when in the first chapter, Danny comments on riding around in her best friend's, I think it was like a Toyota Corolla. Didn't see that coming because again, I thought this was going to be a very fantastical and otherworldly universe, what with it being focused on slayers, sorcerers, and dragons, but nope, they live in current day Tennessee. With that being said, I also wish there had been a bit more world building and explanation of magic. Since we were set in a urban universe, I was expecting there to be more of a deep dive into how magic worked, what was the history behind like the dragons, the slayers, and the sorcerers, but it was very minimal and just wasn't enough to feel completely immersive. Again, with that same expectation of thinking it was going to be a very fantastical universe, I also expected there to be a lot more action because it's told to us that there is an ongoing war between the dragons, the sorcerers, and the slayers. But in reality, this was very slow moving, and I don't think any real action started until maybe 85% in. On top of that, overall, I just think the plot was kind of predictable. So unfortunately, this one just fell flat for me. I did rate it at 3 stars, but according to my Cawpile rating, it was about a 2.8, so it's definitely on the lower side of the 3 stars. Okay, so I'm an idiot. I just closed out this video realizing that I didn't even talk about The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. Why am I like this? Okay, y'all, so next is a book I haven't actually given a rating to yet, but that is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. That is because I am more than halfway through this. I will probably finish it tonight. However, I did want to go ahead and include it in this video because today's the last day of May, and like I said, I'll probably finish it tonight. This is a historical fiction story in which we are bouncing back and forth between 3 different perspectives of ladies tied to this lost apothecary, which is a business run by one of the women, Nella, in which she provides women with different tinctures and things, specifically poisons, to take care of the problematic men in women's lives. At the same time, we are also seeing from the perspective of Caroline, who is in current day. She has recently traveled to London alone after she found out that her husband was cheating on her, and she ends up finding a vial from this lost apothecary and is trying to unearth the history behind it. Finally, we also see a little bit from the perspective of Eliza, who is a young girl that was sent to Nella to purchase one of these poisons for her mistress's husband. Eliza ends up becoming fascinated with the apothecary and seems to be trying to become an apprentice to Nella. Thus far, I've been really enjoying this story. I think it's really impressive the distinction between these 3 ladies stories and the different parts they play within the story. Nella has such a interesting aura about her where you just need to learn more. She has a very sad backstory that has led her to turn what was once her mother's pride and joy of a apothecary into this underground network to provide women with poisons for the men in their lives. Caroline in the current timeline is incredibly sympathetic, and the issues she is having to deal with because of her cheating husband definitely tie her to Nella's storyline as well, and I think it's a very interesting connection there. On the opposite side with Eliza, there is something that also allows her to connect with these two women in the same way, but not also in the same way. Eliza is pretty naive. She's only 12 years old, but it's so interesting to see this world of the Lost Apothecary, which should seem very scary and creepy and, you know, murderous, but Eliza is just fascinated by it and wants to learn more, and I love the curiosity she shows, and it's just so fascinating to see things from her perspective because she is so naive and sheltered. There isn't a ton of plot going on between the three ladies' perspectives. Honestly, it is definitely more of a character-based book because we are spending a great time delving into each of these ladies, their different personalities, their different backgrounds, and the things that are driving them to do what they do throughout the story. I've been really enjoying that thus far, and overall, almost all of the major players in this book are women, both good and bad. The only real prominent male character I would say is Caroline's husband. However, you could technically argue there is a man that is pretty prevalent in each of their lives, and a lot of their pain is connected with the relationship they have with that man. So definitely has some feminist vibes going on in this, and I'm loving that. My one biggest complaint thus far, other than the fact that the plot is what little plot there is very slow moving, but I can forgive that because I like character studies, is the fact that given this is a historical fiction, there isn't a lot of development of the setting, because in Nella and Eliza's timeline it is 1791, I believe. So I feel as though there should be a clear distinct difference between the atmospheres of Nella and Eliza's versus Caroline's, but there's really not, unfortunately, and that is a drawback for me. I think in historical fiction it is a lot easier to be immersed and enthralled by the story if the differences between the two timelines are more clearly shown. With that being said though, I did take a peek towards the back of the book, and I really appreciate the fact that the author included different recipes which are supposed to be from Nella's Apothecary recipe book, and I think that is a fascinating little tidbit to add. I think it would have made more sense if each of those recipes had been dropped maybe as a break between chapters where each of them was used by Nella, but I think some of them that are in there haven't been mentioned thus far, so that possibly could be a reason why. All in all, I am enjoying this. So estimated rating, I think I'm gonna go with like 4 stars as my estimated rating for now. I don't know what it'll actually be. Whenever I get to it, editing that, we'll put it on the screen. Okay guys, that is it. Tell me in the comments down below what was your favorite read of the month. Let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Bye!